Good evening. This is a picture from the July 4th on the Washington Mall, and a couple other pictures. That looks like almost looks like a mushroom cloud there, and that's the Capitol. And that's some people near the music huts of the symphony. And now let's talk seriously about today. The Cato Institute had a 1 hour and 6 minute session online. What would online verification mean for speech, privacy, and youth online safety? And that's mainly having to do with the opinion um, text free speech versus Paxton last week that we talked about last week. And the Cato Institute did for a panel discussion, and I'm going to give you the link to it. And there were it was led by Jennifer Huddleston, who's a senior fellow, and the main speaker was probably Thomas Berry, the constitutional studies scholar, and there was Graham Dufault, who was from the AMP Association, and Ariel Fox Johnson from Common Sense Media, and they're all listed in the link by Cato. And as long as the video is there, you can play it on their site. But the main question, with that particular case was that I had was the idea that if you're expected to upload a government ID to access adult content, and then what is adult content? Is it just limited to video and image porn, or could it involve discussions that you don't want minors to see, like for example, in other countries like Hungary and Russia and so forth, they're making a lot of minors being exposed to anything that distracts them from normal family values. Could it get into that area? Generally, they thought it couldn't, but we'll go through it. The main issue, with this case, and I think Thomas Berry mainly stressed it in his remarks in the opening part of the video, which you can play. The main issue is whether we're interfering with protected speech for adults because we're having to protect children from finding or watching it inadvertently or watching it without their parents' permission. Adults, if they have to give government IDs or give various factors, they could face, being hacked, their personal information being hacked, or maybe in the case of LGBT people, and I'm using the term loosely here, forced outing. Mr. Berry compared this case with the COPA case, the Child Online Protection Act, which was finally settled by a bench trial in 2007, which I actually went to one day of in late 2006 in Philadelphia. In 2004, the Supreme Court had suggested that strict scrutiny would apply to anything that affected free speech for adults by protecting kids. And it's suggested that there might be other means available. And there had been another case in 2002 where they talked about community standards, and that the Supreme Court said this was too broad. The argument you used was too broad. It could affect too many other things. So they sent it back to a lower court, and finally it was settled in 2007. But this didn't quite settle the case here. We wound up with kind of an intermediate standard rather than a strict scrutiny standard. And the reason was that with COPA, it was illegal to have harmful to minors content, but an affirmative defense would be having an age validation screen. In this case, it just simply says you have to have the screen, the validation, if your site has 1/3 or more adult material, and the adult normally means visual porn. Now, there's concern here because the 2025 Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation considered discussion of that paragraph on page 5, considered even discussion of transgenderism as porn. Well, that's just an ideological discussion of an idea, which may be troubling to a lot of us in minors. In minors, it's certainly very troubling, but it's not pornographic to discuss the idea, discuss the problems. But generally now, the saying is probably going to be that porn, for when it interferes with the ability of adults to see it, is going to have intermediate scrutiny. But other things like hate speech or spicy speech, they said, or things that may interfere with, say, military operations inadvertently, like Iran, somehow somebody's opinions somehow interfere with Trump or with particularly Trump's plans to make America more secure as he sees security, something like that. And we all know where that might be leading. With lately, that something interferes, with the mass deportations by ICE or something. That's something like that. You'd have to have a rational basis. I'm sorry. You'd have to have a strict scrutiny, a basis that survives strict scrutiny to allow eliminations of that speech. Rational is the most lenient for the government. Strict scrutiny is the most favorable to the speaker, and then intermediate is in between. If I've got right, rational favors the government, harms the speaker. Okay, now Graham Fault was from the App Association. And he talked a little bit about COPPA, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which is not the same as COPA. It's passed about the same time. But you'll remember that in 2019, and this is something we didn't discuss, 2019, YouTube made a lot of changes because of some federal trade ruling that happened that fall. And they made a lot of it sounded like a big deal. What it wound up was this whole idea of made for kids. And for most of the time, all you have to do is say your video is not made for kids for the monetization to work and to stay out of trouble. That's normally all you have to do is say it's not made for kids. There might be some exceptions. And also in 2019, YouTube talked about a concept called commercial viability, which I guess meant commercial viability with respect to them. It makes sense for them to host you. But it could mean, this is something I've said in a video in the past I made in 2018. I've just talked about before. It could mean that a speaker has to have a legitimate business in order to have a presence online. He or they have to have actual accounting that shows that it's a legitimate business and that they have actual commerce and not just want to talk about their ideas. There are reasons why I think that could happen, and I've been very concerned about that for a number of years. It hasn't really happened, but it's just barely out of reach. It's something that I even think Trump could come up with. I've been concerned about that a long time, and that's what I thought commercial viability could mean back in 2019. But they didn't really get into that. I just noticed that in the presentation. And then Common Sense Media, she got into the various ways you could try to do validation. And it sounded like they were suggesting that you could try to use AI or something and give a lot of ways somebody could validate their age, whether they have a bank account or credit cards or evidence that they're over 18, and use AI to determine it and not just use a government license. It sounded like they were proposing that idea. And that if you're going to use AI, that could probably be something that a lot of people would not trust right now. So I don't know that that discussion was going anywhere. They were kind of ambiguous at the end of this as to whether this law is right now. It seems to affect only pornographic images and videos, whether it could spread to discussion of ideas like it has in foreign countries. Particularly, oh, by the way, Hungary, had a huge LGBT pride parade in Budapest, despite Orban's order. And I don't think they can arrest and fine 100,000 people, but you might have heard about that. I'll just throw that in. That also happened. But generally, I've been concerned about the whole idea that my stuff, for example, here's chapter 4 of my first Do Ask Do Tell book. I put it online in 1998, the summer of 1998, before about the time COPA was passed. And you could, and there's the Wikipedia page on the Child Online Protection Act. And here's the location of Cato right there in Washington. I didn't go to it. I just attended online. But you could, say that, a lot of young men, just simply want to reproduce and have that natural instinct to date and court women, and will go along with marrying and having children. But people that are just biologically less inclined for whatever reason, in my case, like I was, don't conform to gender expectations as boys as much in their desires, are likely to think about it differently and find other things more transcendental than having women and having children. And I think authoritarians want to stop that. They want everybody to participate in the same game of either marrying and having children or being relegated to supporting someone as part of their extended family if they do, taking away the independence of people who don't want to do that. That's going on in these authoritarian countries. So anyway, that was the main thing I wanted to talk about today, was the Cato Institute presentation. And I'll show it to you. I'll give you the link in the description. And I do encourage you to watch it. And I do thank you for listening.